comments nothing about this. It's just astounding work you've done to open the door for people like me who know something about Africa. I mean, spent 2 years in the Peace Corps over there, and my kids all worked over there in Rwanda and places like that. But this is astounding work.
Thank you very much.
Big door, big door. Robin Wright, you traveled to Congo with JD in 2011 and been the leading voice of this peace movement. Why did you choose to get involved with Congo activism?
About 11 years ago, I learned of this crisis from John Prendergast, who was in the documentary, works for the Enough Project. And I was so shocked that I myself, and probably the majority of everyone around me walking the streets of New York, had no idea the connection. Being a consumer of this gadget, this phone I was holding at the time, talking to him, was housing these minerals that were causing such strife, dismantling of communities and raping of women. And when he told me the statistics and that we, our companies, electronics companies in America, were purchasing these minerals from the Congo, I just felt it was my personal responsibility. I felt it was our duty as consumers and my duty as a person that could have a voice, that could reach people, to just vault it into the human consciousness. This needs to be, everyone needs to be made aware of this. We're all responsible. We're a direct link to this problem. It's the worst war since World War II. Over 5 million people have died. Every 48 minutes a woman is raped. It's just, it seemed unacceptable to me.
Mike?
Yes.
Tell us about how you got the idea for the film. And a great title, by the way. It's a grabber.
Thank you.
And I love the metaphor of the grass and the people being trampled.
The title comes from a Congolese proverb, actually an African proverb. When elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And in kind of trying to figure out how to unravel the story and present it to an audience, a Western audience, how, you know, what's the access point to the story that really brings people in. And that was a long struggle. And actually one night at a mine in Walikali under a thunderstorm, it just dawned on me that was the direct access point to this. That it is the elephants. Now the elephants change depending on which aspect of the country, whether you're talking about Katanga mining or Eastern Congo or whichever, the elephants might change. But the reality is that it is that the story of Congo, Western countries, it is the elephants fighting over these aspects of Congolese resources that and the grass is suffering, and that's the point, and we should frame it in. And Robin used the word that I think everybody should use, and I hope everybody will use. It's just unacceptable. I was introduced to Congo accidentally, taken by an NGO to make some photographs for the work they were doing. I also had no idea of what was going on, and certainly not to the level that it was happening. And once you experience Congo, and you experience the great dichotomy of the beauty of the people, of the land, of the culture, and then the absolute atrocity and horror and disregard for human life. And you know, as much as the one thing that I came away with is there's so many different things on planet Earth that are awful and terrible and that we can't do anything about. And it's awful when you feel Congo is not one of them. This is a problem that we can have an impact on. It's not an easy solution, it's not an overnight solution. But there is something that can be done. There is something that we can do, that people can do. And so my thought was, my skill set as a filmmaker is to bring the story of understanding what creates it, the hope that it can be overcome, and the actions we can take to do that. What better use of my time and my skill set than to try to bring the worst human atrocity since World War II to light? And that's why I did it. And you know, had it received nothing, that is what it is. But the fact that enough people on a Sunday night are gathering to sit for 2 hours and watch a film about a country, I mean, that means everything to me. That means everything. There's one line in the film, and this will be my last statement. There's a line in the film that I used, I specifically left in from a gentleman who said, you know, we wish you safe travels. We're happy you're here. Go home, be safe, but don't be one more person in this country with a camera who comes and gives us you want, and we see nothing of it. And now he was the one that I chose, and he articulated it beautifully. But that tension, that feeling of hopelessness, that feeling of utter loss, to see so many people around you dying and knowing that nobody's coming to save you is a feeling that just, the emotion never leaves you. And for him to articulate that, that's what kept me going. That's what, and you know, for all of you to be here, I can't speak on behalf of him, but I'm sure if he knew you were here and this was happening, he would be very touched. So on behalf of him and all the other ones, this is exactly why I made the film.
I never heard a filmmaker allow someone to speak into the camera, their camera, and express skepticism about the project.
Disdain about it. Yeah. You know.
There's other people in the film like that, who's younger people. What's your answer?
I thought it was an important voice to be heard, because as an American in Congo, you're either looked at very naively as somebody who can solve all the problems, or very naively as somebody who's caused all the problems. And both of them are not fair, but both of them have merit, and you understand where they come from. And so I never wanted the film to present Americans of the West as the answer to Congo, which is not true. But also to understand that, you know, there's a lot of reasons that Congo is the situation that it is because of choices the American government has made, the American people have made, and Western governments have made. And we deserve that skepticism. We deserve that disdain. We deserve that, why the hell are you here with a camera in my face? I come from, to make it more personal, I come from Flint, Michigan. Obviously, we know what's happening in Flint, Michigan right now. It's very relatable. The people in Flint, how tired everybody is of somebody showing up with a camera and asking them a question. You know, tell me about the water. Show me your kid. Is your kid sick? You know, that kind of tragedy porn is, to use too fine of a point on it. And so I think that's an important voice, and I think it's an important thing for all of us to understand as we approach these topics, that people, you know, are frustrated.
JD, you're not a newbie to this. Who's your audience besides people here? I mean, who are your enemies?
You know, the film does a really good job of painting a clear picture that we know. We know where the money is moving. We know who's responsible for money moving around, and we really look at that blank check from the mining companies and their proxies as the main reason why President Kabila is immune from donor pressure, doesn't have to engage in the international community, and has been able to withstand, you know, a lot of attempts at pressure and progress for a lot of years. And so, you know, for the campaign to come out at this point in time, there were really three key factors that we saw as real signs for campaign success, for us to be able to do something and make some real change. And on the one hand, you know, Robin and Omekongo and Mike and Tom and a lot of us for a lot of years have been active campaigning in this space, and the space today is different than it was just 5 years ago. There's a lot of new stakeholders engaged in Congo peace. You know, Tim Cook and Apple Computer, chief among them, Brian Krasanich and Intel. We have some of the world's largest and some of the world's other largest companies admitting to their role. So through minerals and supply chains, there's stakeholders invested in Congo peace now that weren't 5 years ago, and that's a result of students and audiences and diaspora coming together and speaking out. It's got the attention of these companies, and so we have a new family of stakeholders involved. Second up is elections, and we'll get to that. We'll talk a little bit about that, but there's a lot of new attention on Congo this year, and questions around President Kabila honoring the Constitution, next steps on the slated elections, and so there's a lot of new attention because of elections. But then third, and again, not least of which, and something that doesn't get any attention I want to bring up is, this is also a different space to be a campaigner than it was just a few years ago, with people making the connections between corporate excess and political corruption. The Occupy movements, whatever its criticisms, maybe injected a narrative into the political landscape in America that's resonating. It's a lot of what's fueling Bernie's campaign, and there's a much wider public conscience around these connections, and it's these connections that the campaign is all about. So we're very hopeful that with hard work and organizing and bringing this tour around, we've got a 50 campus tour that's already halfway through. We just launched the campaign. We've already been to 25 campuses. This is the space and the time for people to make these connections and demand action, and ultimately go to Chris's question is the mining companies that are responsible. The petition is about them publishing who it is that's benefiting off these contracts. President Kabila himself or whoever's in the administration, they do business in the light of day and publish who benefits. And we're asking the United States government to do what it can to put pressure on shutting down these tax havens, these secretive tax havens.
Doctor, talk at length about, you know, you're obviously a Renaissance man, and you have a lot to offer in terms of the richness of this topic. Okay?
About 6 years into the war, I went back to Congo. It was the first time I had ever been, both my parents being Congolese, retired professors, but were also refugees at different points in their lives. And I went out with one of my uncles, and he took me on a tour and showed me different places where in Kinshasa, and he showed me the underground prisons where he and my father were tortured, and where he had to clean up the floors with toothbrushes under Mobutu, and areas where my father was stretched in 4 different directions to such an extent that my mother had to fly back to Congo and plead for his release on live television for everyone to realize what was happening to him. And when we left that morning, he introduced me to my cousin, 22-year-old Saidi, and it was such a powerful experience for me, and it went from powerful to extremely depressing, because when we got back to my uncle's home, my cousin was dead. He was 22 years old. He had a girlfriend, 2-year-old child, and he died from a cold. Simply from a cold. Because in this war-torn country that my family calls home, we couldn't get access to medicine. Simple, basic medicine. And so I'm meeting family members and burying them at the same time. I spent 2 months during that time working in refugee camps with 5,000 different internally displaced persons, people telling me that we're condemned to die here. And in every person I saw, every woman I saw my mother, who was a refugee at least 3 times during the independence movement. And I was reminded about how fighting for the Congo has always been what we've called, unfortunately, the family business. In the late 1800s, my family was scattered across Congo for activities, trying to stop the production of red rubber that was making its way into all of our bicycle tires and all of our Dunlop companies across the globe. And so I left that situation realizing that this can no longer be the family business. Now with 2 daughters and a son, that they can't inherit this, that this has to stop. And so I go hard. I use my work as an academic. I use my skills as a rapper, as an MC, as a poet, to bring as many new voices into this movement as possible, because people need to realize that literally we talk about Congolese lives and how they're being lost. I've lost personal people to this crisis. Family members who I've lost to AIDS, who I'll never meet. People who've been scattered to different parts of the continent who I may never see. And it's extremely important. And then when we learned about the connection, to realize that everybody sitting in this room is directly connected by the purchases that we make, that really became the final straw for me. And whenever we get on the Amtrak train, they always say, if you see something, say something, right? As an upstander, not a bystander, I couldn't be that person to not say anything. Having driven people to hospitals so I knew we're going to die, and seeing so much death and destruction, I came back with a message that my family has been fighting for Congolese freedom for over 100 years, and the fact that it hasn't changed now makes it really sad. But I'm further empowered because I believe that with all the information that we have now, we can really make a change. And just lastly, we have to remember that people like Morel and W.B. Du Bois and George Washington Williams, way back in the early 1900s, helped to lessen the consequences of the first genocide without social media and computers and all of these things. If we just work together and harness that, we can make the change even faster and save more lives, including members of my own family. And that's why I do this work.
Tom, I don't know, hardly anybody here's my age, but I remember all this growing up, the battles with, before Mobutu came in, with Patrice Lumumba, who was considered on the left over there, Moise Tshombe, who was on the right from Katanga province, from what was Stanleyville then. I remember the whole fight of Union Mineral, and the big mineral company that was working with Moise Tshombe, and then he eventually had some sort of collusion with the government. He ended up getting killed himself by the government, and then we were always sort of in there very confused about what our policy was. It was sort of suspicious of Patrice Lumumba in the Cold War setting, but we didn't really have anybody. I guess Joseph Kasavubu was there for a while, and then of course Mobutu came in, and we were sort of, the conservatives in America like Katanga, the Kantangese president Moise Tshombe, and now you've got the politics today, Moise Mutumba, and that politics, and will there be an election? What's U.S. policy been over the years, and what is it now? Where's Congo?
Yeah,
Is there consistency to our policy?
no, was the short answer. I think that what we try to do is figure out whether we're repeating the mistakes of the past or whether we're learning from it. You go back to that period, and there's a great book called The Brothers, about the Dulles brothers that Stephen Kisner wrote. He talks about that section, among other things, like how little we knew about the place. And I think one of the things that happened during that period was there were those in Washington who tended to see everything on a Soviet to Washington axis and frequently missed what were actually nationalist or anti-colonialist struggles and could only see them through the prism of what we saw as the dominant axis of that period, and made some pretty bad decisions along the way there. I think what we see today is a desire, and some of this gets covered in the film. If you look at what our primary interests there are, it's humanitarian. I think you look at, that's not to say that we don't have other issues that come into it. Right now, our primary policy position is respect for the Congolese Constitution. And one of the reasons that I took this job is because in an area that has had arguably some of the most protracted human suffering on the planet, if not the most, over the last 100, 150 years, there's also another story, and that's a story of Congolese inspiration. It's a story of people who wanted an independent country, who wanted their own governance, and what came out of this period, which I think is a combination of stories of not just Western powers making some very bad decisions, but also powers in the neighborhood and on the continent, as well as Congolese elites. But underneath that, there's a tremendous amount of pride and hope in a peace deal and a constitution that has started to move beyond that. The United States doesn't have a position between whether the opposition wins or the presidential majority wins, but we do feel like this is a point where the Congolese people have earned the right to potentially have the first peaceful democratic transition of power in their history.
So we're for him to honor, Kabila to honor his constitution.
Yes. And
so not taking sides.
No. There's, whether the presidential majority, I won't get into names here, but we have no problem. If the president's own sister runs and that's what the Congolese people want, what we support is a process. Now, we also spend over $400 million a year on a peacekeeping effort that remains the largest peacekeeping effort in the world, that continues to have a mandate of civilian protection throughout the East, going after these armed groups. And I think there's much to be said about efforts there that have protected civilians. But at the same time, we saw 2 civilian massacres in Beni just in the last couple of weeks, and we see that far too many people continue to die.
We have some press people, I'm told, in the third row, and I see someone with a pencil busy there. I always see them as a journalist doing the reporting. Do you have a question?
Sure.
Take over.
Actually, to follow on that, I always wonder how much of a pressure point Rwanda possibly could be. We know that the minerals aren't coming from Rwanda, they're being smuggled in, yet we never really hear U.S. government talk about what can happen in terms of that side of the situation.
Well, one of the things J.D. mentioned that I think is really important to note is, while it is very important to talk about the sad news and the bad news, is also to talk about the progress. And I think Dodd-Frank and other measures and some of the brand pressures put us in a very new environment in terms of leverage points than before. You have some very powerful actors now who I think have a vested interest in a system, a closed-loop system where they can certify the materials that are coming out. They have a vested interest in having that supply, whether they come out through Rwanda, whether they come out through Tanzania, you name it. That what's important to them is to be able to have a product at the end of that cycle that they can put into whatever it is they're going to bring out to consumers, because these guys get all these university students ginned up and talking crap about their product. So the good part about that is it creates pressure back in to invest in things. And I've been looking at this in a number of trips through Eastern Congo, both to some of the artisanal mines as well as to some of the big corporate mines. And I think what many of the Congolese entrepreneurs tell me is before there wasn't even the option to do business cleanly. It literally didn't exist because there wasn't a demand side for that existed. For now, for those people who really are committed to trying to create a business model that primarily benefits the people in the community, there's at least that option that exists. It doesn't mean there's not an enormous amount of an alternative source that they're fighting against and all the different price points there. But there's at least an option and a growing option to try to do business there in a way that fundamentally benefits the people, and that's a step forward.
You have that question?
I guess I was talking more about U.S. government aid to Rwanda, and whether the mineral piece plays at all in terms of that in Rwanda, because we aid Kagame. So I'm not talking corporate pressure. I'm asking about U.S. government pressure, if that's something that's ever...
Right. Well, again, we would have the various levers through DOJ and anything else to look at it in terms of any sort of illicit flows that are coming through. In terms of support for Rwanda, obviously they continue to be a huge peacekeeping partner around the planet, around the continent in particular, and one of President Obama's priorities in terms of policy was to try to help develop the capacity of African countries to do peacekeeping across the African continent and develop that with the African Union, and certainly Rwanda has been a partner on that.
Robin? Because you've gotten so involved in this, and you told us the story in the film, I wondered if there's a notion that you have in your head of what would be a God like. I always ask people this: if God was running our U.S. foreign policy, what would he do, or she do? It may happen someday. So what do we do? I mean, these things are so horrible, and I don't, if you could just dictate, what would it be?
I know, you would have to, I mean, ideally you want to replace the corruption, right? That's all, we've always wanted to do that for eons, but, or sedate him. Can we just sedate him and then make the change? But I was just thinking, what JD was talking about and why people still continually ask me, what is the change? What is this proponent? And it's very simply to deduce it. You just go, would you pay $1 more for your cell phone or your iPad if it meant cleaning up the trade? If it meant putting protection on the ground, I think everybody would raise their hand. And it's pretty much that simple, wouldn't you say, JD?
And that's really what we're showing.
Yeah.
That's what we're showing the major stakeholders. And you know, to get back to Lauren's question about progress, in 2012, the M23 movement took the city of Goma, and plenty of evidence, including field reporting on the ground, that M23 was funded by and started by had Rwanda connections. And a response to that from the U.S. with activist support was to withhold $110 million blank check through the World Bank. And so there's been progress and pressure put on in the right places at the right time that I know has gotten Kagame's attention. He went on a very large media tour. If you do a little digging 3 years back, you'll see him trying to defend having no role in that, but the World Bank, with U.S. support, withheld $110 million aid check because of their support, documented support for the M23 rebel movement. And I think it's about showing, whether it's world leaders, board members sitting around the mining companies, or tech CEOs here in the States, that the prescription that Robin talks about, there is a demand for it. It's not just a filmmaker, it's not just a celebrity and a diplomat and a couple activists. There are tens of thousands of people around the country and around the world who are signing on, joining up, and saying, please do this. So we're creating the space to show these stakeholders that there is a large demand for them to amend the way that they're doing business, starting with putting it in the light of day, publishing what's been going on, publishing who's benefiting, and entering into contracts moving forward that some of Congo's resources are returning to the people. Now, does transparency, win peace overnight for Congo? No, but putting billions of dollars back into Congo infrastructure is the progress that we're looking for.
Doctor, there's a pattern now. When I was in the Peace Corps, I taught business in Swaziland, and there was a pattern there you saw. I think in economics it's called indifference curve. It's people that, how much do you want it now and how much you want to wait later? And so the Indian traders would come to the Swazi business guys and say, I'll give you all the produce you want, all the stock you want. Build up a nice loan. And after a while they said, well, you can't pay this back, so I'll just take over the company. I'll take over the store. The Chinese are going in there today buying mineral rights in every country in Africa. They're buying the future. And they deal with governments that are willing to sell the future because they're not going to be there. They want the present money. There's a pattern of African poverty that creates a carpe diem, I got to have it now. You can't fix the road, we got to pay the people. We got to give this sense of immediate need that drives everything in Africa to sell off the future. You know the pattern. What are we doing there? What can be done about that? It's just the indifference curve of the future versus the present, which drives poor people to cut bad deals.
Well, I think, first of all, throughout the continent, we have to realize that there are many situations that don't represent that model. When you look at places like Ghana, and how their stock market has been rising over the last 5 to 10 years. We look at places like Botswana, where democracy has been
It's a great country.
very consistent over the years. And what we see in situations where we have people like Lumumba who had an interest in helping the poor and helping people develop long-term situations, the external support becomes a major problem. So we don't have leaders who are able to last, who have a vested interest in supporting the people. So I think that what really needs to happen is that, we who are in this audience, it's more of a call to action to us, because we have to raise our awareness of what's taking place. It'd be beautiful if, when what was taking place with Lumumba, as we saw in the film, was happening, we had more Americans who are standing up saying that this isn't just about U.S. Soviet interest. This is a person who represents the aspirations of the people. My father was his professor. They come from the same clan. So, we saw that story. And in too many times right now, we have a great new generation of African leaders who are really focused on wanting to do their best. And I'm not talking about just in politics, in technology, across other types of sectors, who have a strong desire to want to build their country. But the question is, will they receive that external, particularly Western support? And that's where our responsibility lies, to keep pressure on our government to make sure that that happens.
Let's bring everybody in now. I'm following the clock here, and it's time for everybody here. So how are we going to do this? I think this has got good acoustics in here. I think if you ask a question, you'll be heard. So raise your hand. We'll start it. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to stand up. Hi, Dr. Rani Mondeke. I'm a native of Congo. That's why I've been sobbing and crying. I came with my nephew here, who is involved who is a poet too, and involved in the fight for Congo. So I have a comment and a question. All right. My comment is just to commend all of you who are involved in this campaign. I thank you so much. Well, my nephew came from Boston and invited me here, and I thought I was just going to some kind of panel. I didn't know it was going to be so deep and so touching and moving. So I thank you all, the campaign, and also I have to thank the director. Thank you for the job well done. I teach African history, all right? And most of the things I saw, the pattern, starting from King Leopold II up to now, you just have proven that history repeats itself, and you have covered more. I've never seen a documentary like this. I use all the documentary when I teach African history for the City University of New York. I use The Great Silence in Congo, or Grand Theft in Congo. It's just a little bit superficial compared to what you did. So good job. Thank you so very much. I hope you plan a good distribution of that. And now my question goes to the congressman. The problem of culture, for example, and the cell phone has been going on for a long time. And I think the Congress knows or is aware about this. What have they done so far to even solve that problem or talk about that problem? If you guys and the Obama administration did something for gold?
Well, thank you. I know there's no better approval for a film than the auntie's approval, so now you have that for the film. There are a number of things Congress has done, I think, over the years, both recently, most notably is the Dodd-Frank Act, and efforts to try to create both, to push the envelope on transparency and certification, and we continue to monitor that, make sure that that's happening in a way where returns are coming back into the community, et cetera. As I said, it appears to be unleashing a new generation of local entrepreneurs who've been looking for an opportunity to do it. Like any effort, it's got other side effects, both expected and not, in terms of one of the complications now is how to ensure that artisanal miners have opportunities within some of these new structures. The other big power player in all of this is something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, which American companies overseas have to follow. And it has quite high transparency standards. And JD and others have really focused on this issue, and it's been getting more attention since the Penwell papers came out. This issue about transparency, you heard about some of the deals and exactly how they're structured in a way that ensures that the vast majority of profits go to a very small number of people instead of being reinvested in the community. And I'll say, I mean, I was visiting one of the largest copper mine, that's on Coltan 2, a few weeks ago, was an American company And I was going around Katanga at the time, and people were having lots and lots of negative things to say about the mining industry in general, but they kept singling out this American mine, in part because it's met environmental standards, public health standards, reinvestment in the community. Most of the executives even have been trained, or Congolese who've been trained. I'm not here to talk about that particular company, but it happened to have just been sold to the Chinese. And so there's a lot of concern about whether the same standards are or not going to be met. Now, that didn't come about, as the film discusses, necessarily because that particular corporation went out of its way and decided to do that on its own. It did that because activists in this country pushed to ensure things like transparency, anti-corruption standards, because there's brand pressure and other things. So I think Congress is trying to be responsive on some of that, and then there are other places where there's a long way to go.
But the law says we can't bribe, right?
That is correct.
But for example, in the movie, which is very true, Kabila is shown there, the current Kabila is a part of this deal and business. The Obama administration is aware of that, maybe, I think, with Kabila. And he's now going to run again for the third time. Is he going to pass or what? Because Kabila is a part of this, from what we see in the film and what we know.
I'm not sure that was a question, but
It is a question. I'm asking, is the U.S. going to support Kabila?
Our position, to be clear, we have a number of key elements of our strategy in the country: atrocity prevention, security, and building constitutional democracy. The Constitution is clear that there is meant to be alternates, and we do not take sides in the election, but we do believe that elections should take place. And we've been very clear about that. We think, President Kabila has done, and the Kabila family has done a lot for the country, and they deserve credit for those positive things that they've done. But this isn't personal. This is simply a belief that the Congolese people will continue to support that constitution. That's what we've seen. We haven't seen a grassroots upswell of popular support saying we want to change the constitution or we don't want to have elections. But as Jason Stearns mentioned in the film, this is going to be driven primarily by the Congolese people. You saw a year ago in January when there was an effort to do what looked like it was going to delay the election, that people came out in the streets, and there were clashes around that. What we hope is that, again, this will be the first peaceful democratic transition in the history of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we think that that's something that has a great deal of popular support, regardless of how people feel about a particular party or a particular person. But again, this is a process where we believe, in addition to all of that human rights needs to be respected as we go forward. And that's one thing, I think, just to get back to what a couple people said, is, this is a depressing film. It's a heavy film, I'm not going to lie to you. But anyone who spent time there, and I know you know this, will also talk about what a vibrant place it is. Incredibly vibrant in terms of culture, but also political views, in terms of media diversity. And I think that's something that people really cherish, and I think that's something that people are going to want to hold on to.
But we have to remember also that Patrice Lumumba was elected, democratically. So we also have to remember that it's not our interventions that are leading to something happening for the first time. We're trying to get back to what we've been fighting for all along. And it's like Stearns or the other person you interviewed in the movie said, that our efforts at democracy, people are ignoring them. And, I think you bring up the great point when people had the clashes in the streets last year. We tried to delay the elections, and that's an extremely important point to make. But we also have to remember that we do have a history of having elections where everyone has been able to participate, but then we've been crushed by external and internal forces.
You're like Mossadegh. Mossadegh, Arbenz, there's a whole list.
Yeah.
We've involved ourselves. Anyway, next question in the back.
Just wanted to bounce off Lauren's question. Are we back to Cold War politics? I mean, if the U.S. withdraws military aid from Rwanda and DRC, they will pretty much clean up their act, but refuses to do so. Is it because are we afraid that China and Russia might fill the void that the U.S. might, if it withdraws from both countries?
Tom?
I'm guessing that's for me again. So the question is, are we in a new Cold War about the concern of this? I think that's overstated. There was there was a lot of talk about this in the context of Burundi, where people felt like this was the switch that was going on, and it really hasn't played out that way. I think there are a lot of factors at play. I mean, I think we want to be invested in the economic development, the public health development, the education development of the DRC and of Rwanda. Rwanda has cut extreme poverty in half over the last few years. There are positive stories, and I think we don't want to get into false binaries that everyone's either an angel or a devil. I think we want to go into this with the understanding that these are complex countries with complex histories. And to the doctor's statement, I think part of the question is, what's the right thing to have learned from those periods? For some people, the answer is non-intervention, that the U.S. shouldn't be there at all or engaged in any way, whether that's economic development or others. For some, it's the idea that we should be standing with the people and not trying to dictate who the leader should be or impose our ideology on something. So we try to learn from these processes as we go along. I think in the Great Lakes, despite what other factors that are at play, the dominant factor for American foreign policy in the region has actually been atrocity prevention since 94, 95. I think, as was said in the film, the Clinton administration carried an unbelievable amount of guilt. I think this is something that's had bipartisan support on the Hill because many of us have traveled to the region. We know the statistics about how many people have fallen. And say what you will about MONUSCO, and I think it is an easy target that doesn't get enough credit for what it does. If you told most Americans that we're spending over $400 million a year on civilian protection and peacekeeping in Eastern Congo, people would consider that surprising and a pretty serious investment. I think those efforts have helped to address issues like rape and sexual violence that were mentioned earlier. Nobody is satisfied with where we are in Eastern Congo. We want to see those militias and armed groups taken out. There's been an effort that has been slowed primarily from Kinshasa to go after some of the most pernicious armed groups over the last year. So I think that, in terms of what we want to see, we care about security and civilian protection. We care about atrocity prevention. We look at constitutional democracies. I think the question about how some other people are playing in the region, people are going to have to look at that in their own, make their own judgments.
Do you agree with all that, JD? Is that our policy?
I gotta say absolutely. I think what was a really tough decision to hold Rwanda to account for M23's take of Goma, the ultimate calculus was human rights, a respect for human rights, and it went to the level of withholding a $110 million check to Kagame, and this was in 2012, 2013, and so I've seen major decisions made, including the creation of this position. Robin and I, on the behalf of Congolese activists who penned a petition when Goma fell, saying it's time the United States appoint a senior level envoy, someone whose full-time job it is to coordinate, synthesize, and move the peace process and engagements forward. When we presented the petition, they said, we were in the White House, we were meeting with the National Security Council team, said, it's very complicated, very expensive, there's all these other things we can do. And we left that meeting saying, but we're here with one ask. And so I think as the NGO and civil society community has grown, evolved, and come together, I've also seen the United States government step forward and respond to that singular voice, and they created this position. We now have a U.S. Special Envoy. They withheld $110 million, and the United States government has been a supportive voice in convening the private sector. And there's nothing to start moving mountains than companies like Apple, and I hope in the near future some of these mining companies to make the same commitments to transparency. It's big, it's complex, there's all these stakeholders, but I'm an activist, and so I've Robin and I have, went to the White House and say, Obama, you must act, and that's been some of the headlines over the years, and so, we're pushing. But I'm here to say progress has been happening, that, the United States, the Obama administration has responded each step of the way over these last 5 years, and it's not for economic gain, it's at economic cost. And it's to hold Kagame accountable in that instance and Kabila accountable in many other instances, resulting from direct calls from our President Obama to both presidents when Goma fell, and other interventions, including the creation of this position, where I'm grateful for the support as an independent activist that the United States government has taken these steps.
What was that meeting like as a civilian?
We actually, I think the most potent moment was meeting with,
Adele,
yes, Adele, with Hillary Clinton's
chief of staff.
chief of
Yeah.
staff. And she just said, you know, she was there in 2009, you followed her in 2011, and she continually says, even though there's always something else that is put above that priority, right? This became the top 3 priorities. And she said it's the unfinished business of the 21st century, and I will do all that I can before I leave office. And so that has been our job, is just pushing the way you do to try to sell a used car. I mean, that's what it feels like. You can't ever stop. You call them 40 times a day, not 4 times a day. And it's just, it's a fine balance as a voice and as a pressure cooker between patience and being dogged. And what is that field in between, and how do you navigate as a human being, because you understand the pressures of what they do and how they're trying to be neutral and fair. And we're on one side of that fence, enraged when you see something like Mike made. And just trying to be human enough and infuse that in all of the public. Like, what are you seeing? What are you feeling that I'm feeling? What are you feeling that he made? And seeing how that can create its own movement. And everybody gets on a wagon to varying degrees. And that's the goal, I think. Right? We're all different, and yet I think we all have the same beating heart.
And so we've packaged that. I mean, today we launch an app. You can download the Stand with Congo app, and through that you can see the trailer of the film. Any community group in the world can request a free screening. And our campaign team is all here today. You know, and thank Kira and Kara and Garrett for all the work they're doing. Leonard, your nephew, has been leading the screenings for Congolese diaspora all around the Northeast. And we've had screenings of Chef Leo is in the house, and he's been getting things done all over New York and offshore islands, raising awareness where it most needs to be raised. And through downloading this app, the work that they're doing has become accessible to you all. You know, around a dinner conversation next weekend, you can bring up the event and seeing the film, and you can point to the app on your phone, and you know, it's for...
JD will come to your home.
I do a lot of that. You can request a screening. You can also sign the petition. It's something that's so easy for people to do. And so we're growing the movement. We're making it mobile, making it easy for people to sign on. But we don't stop there. In addition to the film and the actions that you can take, we've put the research all in one place for you. So if you want to read the deeper publications, the cross-cutting research that Kofi Annan and the Africa Progress Panel have put out on this issue that we cite, that we use throughout the film and in all our products. You can read the reports there, Amnesty and Global Witness and others, Jason Stearns and his work. We've consolidated it all in the app, and so people can geek out. You can read as much as you want about this issue, but most importantly, share your story. You've all been personally invited here. You know, we've been planning this event for over a month and thinking about who to invite. General Gwebe, who's currently the Force Commander in Congo, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for the work you're doing here. I mean, so much you are here and everyone is here, and with you all coming out of this event and sharing the story, making it very easy for you to engage. You're all the heads of impressive networks. You know, my brothers in activism, Michael and Kwame, are sitting in the back, and they've brought representatives from diaspora that span Africa, Pan-Africa, leaders in finance, trying to invest in African business and solutions, leaders in African media who are dedicated to shifting the narrative that this is a continent to believe in, to invest in, to visit, to support. And so we've got the heads of networks here. And so if you all can take and share the story with you, with the app, with the movement, we'll all keep doing what we're doing. This is the next step. This is a big turning point for us, and we're in it to capitalize on these political factors and bring some meaningful change in the near term.
Well, that sounded like a summation, but I still want to have some more questions. Here's one more, so you've been waiting.
So I have a comment, and I hope I'm allowed to. So first of all, I have an ambition. I have the country council of Congo. And two, I came across the 2011 United Nations Environmental Program report. And in that study, it indicated that Congo, the value of its untapped resources, as of 2011, was $24 trillion. Which at that time was bigger than the entire economies of the United States and all of Europe. And the same report also indicated that Congo River had the potential to generate enough electricity for all of Africa. not to mention the fact that the landmass is bigger than all of Western Europe and has an increasingly vibrant entrepreneurial population. But in the same vein, Congo, if you look on different indices out there, it ranks near the bottom of any human development index that you look at. So I think it's a bit of a tragedy for Congo to have these many resources and also be not performing well on indices. As you mentioned, you did talk about God, and if I believe that if any of you here believes in God, creation, or paradise, I believe God meant to be a paradise on earth and was meant to be Congo, but it's not living up to its potential. So I think it's very important that we support JB and his movement and try to put our resources to try to replace this unhealthy development. Thank you.
Couple voices? Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I just want to add something to what Kwame just said. I think because I'm part of this diaspora, and Tom, by the way, I follow the work that you're doing at Great Lakes, really good, especially promoting the private sector. As an executive of the African diaspora firm that's trying to compete in African energy, we see that the biggest challenge is actually how the U.S. backs up the private sector and making sure we can compete against people like China in Africa. But that's what's going on right now. I honestly believe with all my heart that let's not feel too bad about the Congo, because once the private sector conditions are enabled so the Congolese can take over, actually creating the value add that all these resources represent, we all will envy the Congo. So let's just push the private sector envelope, trying to get the Congolese to not only develop the human capacity, but also have that real backing where, okay, instead of Qualcomm going there, just picking on the mineral, why not have some of the manufacturing of the handset being done there? So the answer is a private sector. Whatever there's a private sector that creates jobs, that actually, better the condition, of living, it will thrive. So it's not so, yes, I like the NGOs and the movement, all that stuff, but I'm a wholehearted believer that, private sector, 5 entrepreneurs create America. I believe that 2 or 5 entrepreneurs can also turn around the story of the Congo. That's just my take about it.
Hi, my name is Delon Strickland, and I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing. And you made a comment, you said that the change that will happen in the Congo will come through, will be driven by the Congolese people.
Right.
A lot of the people in the Congo, as you know, are disempowered. There are approximately 67.8 million people that live there. 2.7 million of those people are internally displaced. There is marginalization. There is different conditions of poverty in the DRC. So there has to be some type of way to empower people, to create capacity building, inclusivity at all levels. So I want to know, talk a little bit about, especially in the eastern provinces, we have MINUSCO and we have the stabilization and reconstruction plans there. How are they contributing to the capacity for people on the ground, on the local level?
Well, Robin, you've been involved with women of Eastern Congo, right?
Yeah, I can't answer directly politically what is going on the ground. You probably could.
I will. I got to testify to Robin's leadership, which is so above and beyond human rights campaigning that Robin is a co-creator of Pour La Femme, a give-back clothing company that does work directly with seamstresses, that supports job training on the ground. I'll never forget on Robin's son's 18th birthday, we were visiting a center for returned child soldiers. Morabazi, one of the greatest leaders I've ever met, goes unarmed alone to negotiate the release of the youngest child soldiers from some of the armed groups in the Kivus, and we were visiting his transitional home on her son's 18th birthday, and just seeing I don't have children, and to just see the impact it had on Robin on that trip, but also Robin actively funding and supporting some of the life-saving program on the ground, the capacity building in civil society. We've had fundraisers and been able to give direct support and continue to visit folks who are doing life-saving work on the ground, but we also realize that we can't continue to just fund the life-saving programs on the ground. Something has to be done about this connection. And that's, I think, a point I want to get back to what you raised is, speaking for the non-Congolese on the panel, and we've had extensive conversations for a lot of years now, and I can speak for the panel and say we have a lot of humility about who we are in this space. We have a lot of humility about who we are as international citizens. We're never going to understand the Congo conflict in the way somebody born, raised, and living in the conflict does. We can merely be spokespeople. And on that trip with Robin, people looked her in the eyes and looked us in the eyes and said, you have a platform. You can reach people. You have the technology to tell a story. And we took that very seriously. And we're taking it to the next level through this campaign, too, to extend that platform level, to focus on the people we know responsible, we know are blocking private sector growth, blocking competition, keeping all their business transactions in the hidden dark of opacity. And so that's, in addition to funding life-saving work on the ground, Action Kivu is one of 4 civil society groups we give direct support to through the Stand with Congo campaign. And if you go to our website or our app, you're going to see hashtag don't give us your money. We won't take it. Instead, give it directly to these groups, as we do, give direct support to these groups. But we also have the political angle, and we know, and we've taken responsibility, and we know that we have a role to play in shedding a light on the corruption so that we can move from the dark of night to transparency, where the entrepreneurs and the people we've met with that are ready with the business plan Tom mentioned, they're ready to go, they're ready to build, they're ready to grow, and we want to give them the support by backing away some of that corruption, because both need to happen. Development and political advocacy have to happen simultaneously.
Sir?
Yes, my question to Dr. Omekongo, my fellow Congolese poets and brother. Question for you. Obviously, the Congolese perspective is very important in this conversation. How do we? What are some of the ways that we empower more the Congolese diaspora to be involved in this issue? Because what do I mean by that is, oftentimes, we not as united as we should, as Congolese among ourselves. And oftentimes, the Congolese population who migrate here in the United States and the West seem to just focus on, on Congolese development and you gotta learn the language, and that's happened to me. But through my poetry and work, I find ways to really educate folks. But it seems that the diaspora in the Congolese in the West, sort of, out there as we should be. For a while I felt alone, but I know that you were out there with me in a sense. But how do we empower just the diaspora in so many ways, and to keep in mind that the population of Kinshasa, it's 80 million, but half of that is young people, and there's not so much hope in terms of.
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, we're here in New York where they have events like Sheikh Amadou Bamba Day for Senegalese, and I see other African diaspora communities, Nigerians and so forth, who show a certain level of unity outside of the continent, but it's not the same for us as Congolese people. I think one of the problems, when you look at when we got independence, we had one college graduate in the entire country, right? So many of us had this desire just to remove ourselves from such a horrific situation and never return to it. And a lot of our parents had a lot to do with that because of what they experienced, the tragedy, the drama that they experienced, the death, the violence. My father coming home and finding that his father hung himself after he thought he was killed during these war movements and the like. And so I think a lot of the prior generation instilled a sense of move away from Congo in search of better opportunities. But I think now, in this day and age where we have more access, more opportunities to see what's there and see its potential, I think that alone can be used as a source to get more Congolese youth back involved in what's taking place. And this is what is extremely important for all of us who are Congolese, who are out here. Yeah. We have to be extremely important and very knowledgeable about changing the narrative of what is being said about Congo. Because we know that, as I say, the U.S. media can only handle one African conflict per decade, right? So, in the 80s it was Ethiopia, in the 90s it was Rwanda, the last decade it was Sudan, and now like all of us are fighting for that piece of that minuscule pie on the media, right? But in each one of those situations, everything was painted as these hungry, poor people who need us to come and save them. We need saviors. And those of us who are out here now in New York and Boston and London and all these different places, we need to be part of changing that narrative. Number one of the reasons I love working with JD and Robin and Mike on these projects is because they're not out here saying that this is what we're doing for Congolese people. This is what we're doing with Congolese people. So recognizing and acknowledging people like Fidel and other movements, people who are already on the ground doing the work. Because a lot of Americans will say, well, why should I care if they don't? Why should I care? Why should our U.S. development dollars go towards them? And we have to show that it's not about that. Because we've been fighting for our liberation, for our freedom forever. So our greatest challenge as Congolese people and children of the Congo is to be out there to change the narrative, and then people will start to see the beauty of what's going on. But we have to be continually engaged in that, and that's how we're going to see real change.
One last, we have a media question.
Is there any discussion in the Congo of renationalizing mines and keeping as much of the natural resource money inside the country as possible, or is that ship sailed?
I can't speak for the Congolese government, but I'll just say that, like Jack, it's still nationalized. It's the way that process works that's the biggest issue. So it's not a complete privatization of the entire economy. It's more of trying to, the impetus behind it was that they didn't have the infrastructure to develop the mines after Mobutu let everything go to disrepair. Then they needed somebody to come in, and these massive mines in Katanga take huge infrastructure, and so they needed international partners to come in. So it's not that anybody's saying we don't want international partners to come into Congo and work with them, because they have the infrastructure, they have the knowledge. It's the way that all that goes down that is the real issue. So they never completely walked away from the nationalization of the resources. It still is owned by the government, and technically owned by the people of Congo, which is all the more, to this gentleman's point, all the resources and the wealth for these people. I mean, who knows what, if you broke that up individually, what each Congolese person should technically be worth. But so it's not getting rid of selling off all the assets. It's how that business works together, and it does need to be a cooperation. We just need to figure out how that cooperation works a little bit more on the benefit of the Congolese people.
Well, this has been an eye-opener for me. I hope for everybody. And I guess you're stand with Congo. That's the rest of the program. You can do that on your own.
Thank you.